worse than Watergate.
It is a scandal.
Yes.
It is. It is without question, and maybe even worse than Watergate in some way.
That's the soundbite from Jake Tapper making the rounds this week. Where has he been for the last couple of years? The news anchor now acknowledging the potential efforts made to cover up former President Joe Biden's mental decline. It might be a bigger scandal than Watergate. I mean, it's incredible. All right, so was Joe Biden ever fit to run the country or not? Did they know from the beginning? That's the question on a lot of minds after hearing the news of Joe Biden having stage 4 prostate cancer. And now 5 Biden staffers are set to be interviewed by the House Oversight Committee next month on a widening autopen investigation. And that's just the start. Let's bring in a couple of folks that have their finger on the pulse of Washington. President and executive editor of the Daily Signal, Rob Bluey. Also with us, political strategist Luke Ball. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Lydia.
So, Rob, what do you think of Jake Tapper? Like, has he finally seen the light, or do you think he was lying then, or he's just trying to make money and rewrite history because he looks like a fool?
Well, Lydia, I've heard several of the interviews that Jake Tapper has done, and it's hard to know exactly. I mean, he makes the case that these administration officials were hiding everything from not just him, but other reporters, and they couldn't get to the bottom of it. And I have some sympathy for that point of view, simply because if you recall, it was the Biden administration that revoked the press credentials of the Daily Signal and 440 other reporters. They did everything they could to keep him isolated and separated from the press and having to answer hard questions. He went months without doing news conferences. So yes, on the one hand, I do understand that they were trying to keep him hidden. At the same time, I think it was fairly obvious to you and to me and to everybody else that was watching Biden that he was deteriorating both physically and he didn't have the mental capacity to be president of the United States.
It's a constitutional crisis. I mean, this massive cover-up. We had Lindsey Lee on before. She was a former DNC staffer. Now she's Republican strat. I mean, she's like, you could, Luke, I don't know if you heard the interview, but I'm sure you've seen her on other channels. She said you couldn't even mention it. Otherwise, you would get excommunicated. It was almost like a cult. That's what it feels like the Democrats became at some point.
Sure. And with Watergate, at least you knew who was at the center of the controversy. We're not even sure who was in charge in the Oval Office with the Biden scandal. And the problem is the Democrats lied to us, they gaslit us, and now they're trying to get money from us by selling these books. It's kind of like a bad relationship, a bad breakup. But now they want us to trust them again. Another step in a bad relationship. You know, I don't think that they have much credibility with the American people right now because they don't have any policies. They don't have a centralized leader. They don't have any new messaging to go against Trump's economic agenda, which was at the centerpiece of this past election. So they're continuing to be in the wilderness. I've said a couple times over the last few weeks, the Israelites wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and Democrats are on track to beat that record. Why on earth would we believe a political party that lied to us for years on end and to this day still refuses to tell us the truth? There are some Democrats that are saying, hey, we need to be honest with the American people and be fact finders here, but not a majority of them. They're just going against Trump and railing against him. We need to understand who was in charge in the Oval Office and figure out if voters were disenfranchised over the last 4 years.
Yeah, I mean, you had people that donated money to thinking Joe Biden was fit to be president. And then Nancy Pelosi staging that coup, waking him up from his nap and telling him, you know, Dr. Jill, she's the one that had to wake him up and tell him, hey, honey, you're not running anymore. And now we have the House Oversight Committee. They want former staffers. They're expected to give their testimony in a few weeks, Rob. You know, the Biden's physician, he's also expected to testify. Where's Dr. Jill Biden? I want that. If there's one doctor I want under oath, it needs to be Jill Biden. What do you think?
Oh, absolutely. And let's add Senator Ron Johnson, who has sent a letter to all of the former Biden cabinet officials saying he wants to hear from them because obviously they were closest to him. They were his closest advisors, or were supposed to be. So I would like to hear from all of these people. You know, the Oversight Project, which has done tremendous work in terms of breaking the autopen scandal. I think it's about time we get to the bottom of what was actually going on, who was making those decisions in the Oval Office. Clearly, it was not Joe Biden. There were a series of aides Republicans that he had empowered or taken matters into their own hands to decide these consequential issues, not only from a domestic point of view, but foreign policy issues. And let's face it, as Luke just said, this was a disastrous administration. Not only here, the American people felt it in terms of the cost of living, that all the goods and inflation that was out of control, but look at what happened overseas, both in Ukraine and the Middle East. There was scandal after scandal, and Joe Biden, I think if we had a competent president, may have been able to prevent that, but clearly he was not calling the shots.
He wasn't calling the shot. The autopen, we don't know who is behind it. You've had Senator Tim Burchett, right? He thinks that there might have been some kind of pay for play scheme, right, going on here. What do you think, Luke Ball? Do you think that's possible, that people were getting paid for pardons? I mean, Joe Biden signed more pardons than any president in history. It's incredible to me. And you have President Trump who says that he doesn't think that Joe Biden, if he was in his right mind, would have allowed the invasion of 21 million people.
There's so many people in the Democrat Party that could have stopped this. And Rob made a really good point. The cabinet officials, the ones that could actually do something about it, invoke the 25th Amendment, actually go out there and say, hey, we have a major problem here, all trotted out on the national stage and said, oh, he could run circles around me whenever we're in meetings. It's totally fine. But you bring up a good point, Lydia. There's also political strategists that had a lot to gain financially if they pushed him through this campaign. I think the ultimate goal was to try and pull Joe Biden over the finish line and then allow him to step aside after a few months in office and maybe say he did have some sort of cognitive decline, to allow Kamala Harris to step into play and then have her run the country for a full 8 years or whatever. So I think there was a conspiracy at the top upper echelons of the Democrat Party, because we saw a coup during the primary election. There's no way they didn't know as a whole, these political strategists, that Biden was in decline. So they had to be planning ahead. You logically follow this fact pattern, and you see that Kamala Harris would have been in the Oval Office one way or another from their point of view. So they have to answer for this as well. It was also the Biden family. If this were my grandfather, we'd be having a conversation about the car keys, and yet they were pushing him to run for president a second time. They knew full well they lied to us because they had so much to gain, and now that it's all being exposed, they're still trying to gain from us by writing a bunch of books about it.
Absolutely. They wanted that DEI hire, Kamala Harris, first woman of color as president of the United States at all costs, and they wanted somebody they could control. We know that's what the Democrat Party is all about, power and control, folks. Rob Bluey, Luke Ball, we have to leave it there. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.